Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be talking about Chrysler. Now, Chrysler isn't doing all that well today. They're not really selling all that many cars because a lot of their previously very popular vehicles have just come down to they're just taboo now. They're not popular at all. And these are cars like the Dodge Neon, the Caravan, the hatchback they had, the Dodge Magnum. All of these vehicles, they served a market that we now consider niche, and that really sucks for Dodge. That came to a huge huge financial issues for Dodge, and they didn't really know how to evolve. They only in the last maybe 10 years were they able to evolve, and at this point they're still in like kind of growing issues because they are owned by Fiat at this point. Now, I was never a big Chrysler fan, but Chrysler always had a silent presence in my life. Now, I did like Chevy. I really liked the Corvette. Got to see one in Detroit when I was young. I really liked the Monte Carlo SS due to NASCAR. It just looked kind of like a NASCAR. My dad owned a Cavalier Z24. Those are really cool. And my uncle owned a Ford Escort. So I got to see both sides here. And I also got to like Mazda, so that reinforced that Fordness inside of me. But Chrysler was very, very silent. The only time I ever got to see a Chrysler was actually, and kind of like lust after it, was actually in a car magazine, getting to see a Dodge Viper concept. That was one of the first times, and it looked amazing. Now, this is for obvious reasons. Dodge didn't really have all that many vehicles in the early 2000s when I grew up. And a lot of its vehicles were for like much older people. And it's just because that's kind of where Chrysler was at the time. They either sold extremely cheap cars or they sold extremely high-end cheap cars. And so because of that, I never really got to see all that many, except for maybe Dodge trucks, which at the time I didn't really like trucks other than, monster trucks. Not that many monster trucks are based off of Rams back then. Nowadays it's a lot more popular thanks to Cummins engines just getting more popularity, etc. But so, overall, didn't really know all about it. But here's the thing, 10 years prior to that, Dodge was a lot more popular and sold a lot more vehicles to the masses. And this was for a lot of reasons. The main reason was that these niche markets were not niche. They were extremely popular. They were trendy formats of cars. You had the Dodge Caravan, which is really the first minivan. You had the Dodge Neon, which was one of the cheapest cars you could buy at that time. Kind of niche Dodge Charger, which was like kind of a sporty coupe, which at the time was very popular. But obviously that name brand wasn't as popular. What was more popular was the Dodge Daytona, which was an absolute legend of its day, especially for kind of its price point. Now, you could see the Dodge Daytona kind of being the ancestor of the Dodge Stealth that we all know and love. The Dodge Daytona did a lot of these things, and it kind of served a specific market. I would call it the premium muscle car. Instead of competing against like Ford Mustangs and Camaros, they kind of competed against Thunderbirds and more luxury oriented Camaros. And so that's what made the Dodge Daytona interesting, is that although it competed with a lot of these kinds of cars, it also gave some extreme performance. And so it was a bit of a bargain car. Although it had better luxury than a Ford Mustang GT or a Z28, it kind of had similar performance figures in a package that was similar to a Honda Prelude. And it was one of the cheapest cars you could buy at the time. Now, of course, at that time, people did not really care about if a car was front wheel drive or rear wheel drive, because as it standard, suspension setups were not all that great for either vehicle. Now, obviously, with some good shocks, most of this stuff doesn't matter for today's standards. But back then, if you wanted a dailyable car, it wasn't necessarily in your benefit to get a rear-wheel drive car. And so front-wheel drive was actually seen as a benefit in a lot of people's minds. And at least, at the very least, a lot of the magazines were trying to promote this idea of getting a front-wheel drive car. Now, what made the Dodge Daytona special? Well, it came with a 5-speed manual right out of the factory, which is very nice compared to some of its maybe slightly older muscle car competitors. And it also came with a little 2.2 turbo engine that actually made a lot of horsepower and even more torque. So it was a very torquey car. And back then, with tires that were not so good with traction, torque was actually very important. Now, compared to the big three American manufacturers, the Daytona actually edged out against the Ford Mustang, even the GT trim, and the Chevy Camaro's Z28 in terms of performance. I mean, probably for its price and for what it was. But the reality is that it was actually very comparable to the Toyota Celica and the Honda Prelude of its time in terms of performance on the track, on the quarter mile, etc., etc. And this is considering it was the cheapest of the, well, premium sports cars of the time. So very, very surprising stuff. And it was for good reason. You had better suspension, more equipment that helped handling. I'm pretty sure it had brake control. What's it called? Yeah, disc brakes and brake control. I think it had 4-wheel disc brakes even at stock trim. So that is very crazy stuff. Back then, even a lot of muscle cars had only drum brakes. So how come it was so good? This was thanks to, obviously, DSM. Now, what is DSM? It's basically Dodge's import market. It's a Japanese import market. Now, every American company did it differently, but I think that Chrysler embraced exported engineering for the domestic market. And so the Daytona in the 1990s had a pretty significant facelift. They changed a lot of the body panels, which made it a lot more beautiful. And they actually brought in a 3-liter single overhead valve V6, which is now known as the 6G72 that we saw in the Dodge Stealth. And this was a significant upgrade. It never came with turbos, but it made over 210 pound-feet of torque and 160 horsepower, which is really not that bad. It competed directly against the Mustang Modular and the Camaro, although the higher trims did make more horsepower than this vehicle. This vehicle was more against the regular Mustang with some leather packages. It was more of a luxury car in that sense. Now, it's no Chrysler Conquest TSI, it's no Dodge Stealth RT, and it's no Eagle Talon TSI, but all these cars came a lot later. So, for sure, we can be happy for the Daytona for its looks, its features that it gave at the time, and its tuning performance that it could give you in the further future. So I'm sure that at some point, Daytonas were popular quarter-mile cars, as they gave the same engine as a Dodge Stealth, of course non-turbo, but at a much smaller price. So let's give praise for this car, and let's not remember it as 90s garbage, but truly as a unique market competitor that actually destroyed the competition in some ways. Thanks, guys.